All right, welcome everyone. This is our conversations on our book club, reviewing our first book, which is Zero to One. And let's show the book to you, Zero to One by Peter Thiel. And that's the book that we will be discussing, which is Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. And we will
Yeah, this is the
go
book.
chapter by chapter and review a chapter summary or highlights, and then have our discussion on some of the points discussed in this book, which is co-written by Blake Masters and Peter Thiel. So let's
And this is our second
jump
session.
into jump into session two, where we finished with the introduction, background, authors, and now we are going to start with chapter three. All right, so chapter three is titled "All Happy Companies Are Different." And it's basically a discussion on what exactly makes a company unique or successful, or what's the right approach in building a company. Um,
I think this chapter is basically about the concept of competition. I think probably it's one of the most important chapters in the book. Uh, but he talks about creation of value. He talks about capture of value, and then he talks a lot about monopoly in this chapter. And and his approach towards monopoly, of course, is very uh, uh, not mainstream. Um, so yeah, so the basically,
Very
but I
contrarian
would label
approach. He
this chapter
really takes a stance which goes against the popular
contrarian.
belief or
Exactly,
popular
exactly.
bit. So let's start with the first question that he starts the chapter with. So he starts the chapter: what valuable company is nobody building? So he asked the question that when you go out and you say, okay, I want to build something valuable, so then you have to say, okay, what is that valuable company that nobody is building? And he says the question looks harder than it sounds, because, and then there he gives the real essence of the chapter, that creating value in someone's life, something good and honest, is not the point of a business. Capturing the value that you're creating and getting some reward for it is the main focus or idea about a business, that you have to capture
And
something.
only
So let me
Danish,
get
also in this question, it also give you a taste of the main thrust of the chapter, what no one is building, right? This is the emphasis, what no one is building. So he emphasized it a lot, doing something that no one is doing, and the spirit behind basically is to avoid competition.
mm,
That
mm.
is the main point. But no one is building. That's very important point to emphasize. But no one is building.
Very cool. But in terms of capturing the value, he immediately jumps into a very interesting example, which I think even Warren Buffett talks a lot about. That one of highly valuable business in terms of making a big change in your life is the airline industry. It has made travel so much easy. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. Cheap flights, and very cheap available, very competitive pricing that can come down if there is more seats or capacity available. But he says that in 2012, the average airfare each way was $178. But still, airline made only 37 cent on a passenger out of that $178. And everything else was their expense. And in comparison, something like Google, which also create a value that you can search whichever you want, maybe not as impactful as maybe air travel, but who knows, debatable. But they were able to bring in about $50 billion in revenue in 2012, and out of which is they were able to keep 21% of it. 21%. 37 cent on 178 is, not even 0.5% or something like that, or not even
Yeah.
half a percent. So maybe less than that, maybe 1/20th of a percent, and 21% compared to that by Google.
He's very clear about the concept of value, uh, which is a social value that your business is generating, and economic value that you are capturing. These two things, he knows the difference between these two. He says that, well, airline industry is useful, it's doing a lot socially, it's very useful, right? But the person who is running the business is not getting capturing all that value that he's creating for other people. So basically, the
Right, right.
company is barely is surviving, but not making any money for the owners. But that is the capture of value part. The creation of value is still there. Company is still doing
Right,
a lot of good things for the society.
right.
So that
So
distinction
that
is very important.
So he introduces these two then concepts that, the two examples he gave of the two companies. He says one of them is an example of what is called perfect competition, where you're getting cents on, not even cents on the dollar, you're getting cents on hundreds of dollars. And the other one is a concept of monopoly. Now, I think before we jump into the definitions of perfect competition and monopoly, that's where the contrarian view comes out, that monopolies have a very bad social stigma about it. Monopoly is somehow someone cheating you out of money, someone really forcing other competitors out, or there's like a monopoly created by force, by brute force. That you really have thugs who goes and kill anyone who wants to open a business where you have a business. And I think that kind of a persona of a monopoly was very intentionally created by media, by mainstream media, by movies. A lot of movies around depression have this kind of a concept that monopolies are basically mafia doing business is monopoly, and
Yeah,
idealist people who are humanitarian are perfect competition. But that's not the case, right?
yeah. So after he talks about profitable company, then he basically pivots to what makes a company profitable, right? What gives you the ability to capture the value? And that the main theme behind is monopoly. Monopoly profits basically are high margin profits. And here is the important point that he distinguishes between good monopoly and bad monopoly. He says bad monopoly is a monopoly when you corner the market, jacks up the price, and stop all innovation. That's a bad monopoly. What is good monopoly? Good monopoly is that you innovate, and then as a reward you get monopoly status. And these two things are different. Like you develop a new drug, and as a reward you get the patent, which is a monopoly. So that is a good monopoly because it is encouraging innovation, and it is encouraging uh, productive activities in the society. On the other hand, the cornering the market and jacking up the price is basically exactly opposite kind of monopoly, which he opposes. So
Exactly.
that's
So,
good monopoly.
this chapter does not go into details, and the later chapters does. But I want to quickly mention here, when Peter Thiel is using the word monopoly, he specifically means the characteristics that make company so good at doing what it is doing that it is hard to beat it, or hard to offer something that is equivalent or comparable. So it's either that they have innovative so much that it's hard to match them their products, or that they're able to produce it at such cheap cost that it has to make something so cheap like they're doing, and so on and so forth. So we will go into that details in later chapter, but I just wanted to highlight it here because as we're going to talk about monopoly and perfect competition, if you listen to this with the background, with the context that monopoly means that someone is sending in their thugs or mafia men or hired guns to basically break your legs because you are building something next to their building, or a shop opening another shop close to their shop. That is not what monopoly means. That's
No.
illegal. That's unlawful. Monopoly is the wrong word to use. That's actually theft or fraud or terrorism or whatever. There are other words for it. That's not what the word monopoly means. And so let's clear that confusion before we go on to this discussion of perfect competition versus monopoly. So
But
he
this is
defines.
an important point to remember, Danish. But to be honest, monopoly in both cases will be very profitable. Monopoly companies who corner the market, they also become very profitable. But their profitability is at the cost to the society. So society is paying for it. So
So I'm going to quote
somebody
him.
else.
He specifically talks about this point. He says that to an economist, every monopoly looks the same, whether it is by deviously eliminating your rivals or securing a license from the state, maybe by bribing or lobbying, or innovating yourself to the top. So to economists, it looks all the same. But what we are talking about is not illegal bullying or government favorites. But we mean by monopoly is a kind of a company that's so good that what it does, that no other firm can offer a close substitution. And
Yeah.
that's what he really means by monopoly. And in that sense, it's a
It's
very, very good thing to do.
it's actually something you end with, not something you start with. You did something you're so good that you get monopoly. It's not that you just get monopoly and then capture the value. So basically, in that sense, it's not even a monopoly. It's more like a trade. You do something good and you get something good in return. It's more like that rather than But that's
Right.
we
So
can
then he jumps
move
into
on.
this discussion, very interesting discussion, which I didn't think about before. But he thinks that it appears as if there are not many monopolies in the world, and then most of them are competitors. But he says that that's a false, that's a fake, or that's a lie. And he says that's a lie, that monopolies are rare. That is actually supported by both sides, even those who are in perfect competition and even those who are in monopoly. So of course, if someone is in monopoly, the reason to lie is obvious. You don't want to come out as a bad guy. You don't want to come out that you have cornered the market. You want to really look like an underdog, that your cost of doing business is higher than what it actually is, or your technology is not as far advanced or something like that. But surprisingly, people who are in competition also don't want to make it sound like they are in perfect competition. So they want to look a little more like monopoly. So they want to say, oh yeah, we have an edge on other guys. We have something special, or we can really corner a special niche of the market. And that was very surprising, but very interesting concept, that both sides actually lying to make it look like the monopolies are actually, all companies are about the same. There's no perfect
No,
competition and there's
actually,
no
what
monopoly.
he's saying is that monopolist will always say they are not monopolist, and non-monopolist will always say they are monopolist. So basically, it's like people who have value, they always try to hide, but people who never who don't have value, they always try to show off. So he actually
So
says
let's
that.
Yeah,
Go
let's
ahead.
jump into, actually, to me, the most interesting lies were actually the lies told by those who are in competitive business. And they're trying to lie themselves that they're monopoly. And some of these things that I read, I saw that happening in 2021. And one of the
Yeah.
biggest trickery is to define your market in a way that makes you look like as if you're a monopoly.
Hmm.
Right? So he goes into very beautiful examples in long length, but the bottom line is that, let's say you're a restaurant, and if you say I'm a restaurant, I'll say, well, there are 20 other restaurants. Then you're a competitive business, right? It's a cutthroat business. You're trying to basically serve food to people and make money from it. But now you want to appear as if you're a monopoly. Then you will say, oh, I'm a restaurant, but I'm on that particular street, or I have a better parking, or I serve a food that nobody else does. Okay, what food do you serve? Oh, I serve this, English breakfast food. So that's why I have no competition. But then the question is, how many people, when they're hungry, are actually looking for an English breakfast to eat, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm a South Indian. I'm an authentic South Indian cuisine. Well,
Yeah.
when somebody's looking for an Indian food, how many are looking for an authentic South Indian cuisine? So that was very interesting thing, that this defining of the market as you have a niche market is actually a false lie that most businesses tell and startups tell, to tell themselves, oh, we are a monopoly, then nobody will be able to compete with us.
Yeah. Basically, he uses a very interesting example from actually set theory. He said that non-monopolists basically talk about the intersection of different businesses and say that they are the intersection point, which means they are talking about this is a niche that we have, and we are basically monopoly in that niche. So, but that niche is just made up niche. It is not a real niche. And then he says that monopolists basically are more about they try to hide their monopoly in some other big businesses. So it's about union of different businesses. So basically, they try to basically say that no, we are not big in the context of the whole world. We are small. So they are trying to
Yeah. So
merge other
an
businesses
interesting
with their.
an interesting example will be these days some of the awards I see given. So award, for example, me earning an award for the smartest Pakistani doctor under age 65 who lives in St. Cloud, Florida, within
Yeah.
5 miles of within 5 miles of UCF. So if you
Yeah.
define me so narrowly, of course I'm the smartest guy. Or you can say the
Sure.
smartest guy who lives on this street address. Of course, then he's the smartest guy, because you have now made the comparison so small that you will say, oh, he's a monopoly. He's the smartest guy. Well, when you say, well, the smartness has nothing to do where you live or where you are. All of these
Yeah.
criteria being used to define you as the smartest guy have nothing to do with smartness.
Basically, the point is that because everybody is unique, you can basically create every individual as its own category, and they can be the champion in that category. So basically, you keep on adding more features unless only one person is left standing, and you say, well, this he is the person who is basically the best person in that category. So yeah,
And
that's a game that we play.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then the counterpoint is that the monopolist would lie and say, "Oh, we're not a monopoly because we are in a in a very broad business or in a very vague business. So, for example, Google say, "Oh, we're in the software business." We're not monopoly because there's so many other in the software business. Microsoft in
Yeah,
software,
he gives a good
Apple in
example of
software.
Google. From the search engine business, basically Google say that, oh, we are in the advertising business. So he actually gives an example that Google controls 68% of search engine market in 2014, and then uh, if you consider whole global advertising, it's $495 billion. So Google can always say in the global advertising market, we are a very small player, uh, which basically uh, so basically they can make themselves look small,
Right,
again trying to
exactly. So
hide
if
them
if
out.
if they if they were telling everyone they're the search company, then they're a monopoly. They hold seventy
They're
percent of all
monopoly,
search flowing.
of course. They're
But they
monopoly.
never
Yeah,
say they're a search company. They'll say, "Oh, we're a global advertising company, or we're a tech
yeah,
company, we're a technology company,
yeah,
we're a software company."
yeah,
And when you say
yeah,
that, now you'll say, "Oh, we're less than 1%." Of course, you're less than 1% because you are not a technology company. You're a search company, and
yeah,
and you are controlling all the search. Everybody who finds something finds it. What you tell, you let them find, and of course, you're a monopoly. And nobody can beat
yeah.
your
They
search
fight
because
the
your
TAM,
technology is so powerful.
TAM. Our TAM is they just make the TAM look bigger. So that's
So I
that.
think then he defines one of the big downside of competition, and he says that one of the biggest problem of a competitive ecosystem, that if you are one of the 20 restaurants on the street, then you will be cutthroat. You'll be cutthroat by trying to make your product as best as possible and sell it as cheap as possible, which means that you will keep on discounting or really cutting down your margins until even to a point where you will start offering it at a loss with a hope that eventually the other one will be out of business and you will still be there, and then you will have all the competition and corner,
Sure.
but you forget that somebody else will start as soon as that happens. And that is the problem of ruthlessness of a competitive ecosystem.
Yeah. See, he says basically competitiveness is a very important point to realize that competition destroys values in a very different ways. For example, competition also the obvious reason is that there's a duplication of effort in competition. So a lot of resources, a lot of capital is wasted. So in that sense, so there's a destruction of value in that sense that overall capital is lost. Secondly, with the competition, there's a race to the bottom with the prices. So your cost keep on overall cost is high, revenue starts shrinking because you're cutting cost, your margin starts shrinking, you're struggling for survival, and it's hard for everybody. It's hard for the entrepreneur, it's hard for the employees. They can't think long term, they can't invest in the future. They basically are very mean. That's a mean spirited business, a competitive business. So
I think
usually
one of
they are.
the biggest downside of this competitive market, and one of the biggest advantage of monopoly, is the freedom to innovate. If you are already on small margins and you have a strong competitive pressure, then your natural response will be to try to just keep doing what you're doing more efficiently, so you can do it cheaper and you can sustain your margins, or offer another discount. And you will never try to innovate because innovation will be risk, innovation will be expense. So you need that freedom of doing capital expense and taking a risk when you have large margins from being a monopoly. So monopolies have an opportunity to innovate, and competitive companies will always have an incentive never to even think about innovation or let anyone try to do innovation.
Danish, this is one of the best studies in this is the AT&T, the original AT&T, and that was a government sanctioned monopoly, and they were highly profitable, and because they were secure in their position, they
You're talking
invested
about
a
Bell company, right?
Bell
Ma
Labs.
Bell, Mother
Bell,
Bell.
I mentioned Bell Labs last time also. But those they were hiring PhDs, they were hiring scientists, they were planning for 20 years in future. They were working on technologies with no immediate payoff. It was actually such an extraordinary institution, Bell Labs. But the
Bell
reason is
Lab was
basically
the company that actually proved that the universe is expanding. Imagine they proved Einstein wrong. The level of quality of the work they were doing, that Einstein had
they
to
did a
afterwards
lot,
say that,
Danish. They did a lot. They had, I think at one point they have like they usually have hundreds of PhDs. They
Yeah,
actually invented
and
transistor.
it was a phone company.
It
Imagine
was a
that.
phone company.
You would
It was a
read
phone
Bell's
company.
Lab breakthroughs. You would say it's the highest PhD institute in the world, and they were just a phone company, and they were
Danish
doing
communication
amazing work.
theory. No, communication theory. Founder was Claude Shannon. Claude Shannon was basically a theoretical physicist. They actually now Claude Shannon is on their payroll. Claude Shannon comes, works, goes back. Like he's just like, and the company can afford that because of monopoly status. They can support that. So
And
that
I
was
think,
it. Yeah, go
very
ahead.
interesting observation he said that I never thought about it. He says even the government knows this. That's why one of its department works hard to create monopolies by
Yeah,
granting patents to new inventions, even though another part hunts them down by prosecuting
yeah,
antitrust cases. So very interesting that
yeah,
the whole concept of patent came out of this idea that there has
yeah.
to be some incentive and breathing space for people to create and play with the creation. So, if you just allow everybody to copy, then there's no incentive to do more creation.
Now, patents are a good example of good monopoly. Of course, people are now playing with that also, finding a different indication for the drug, and, that kind of people are playing the games with that now. But patents in its spirit is they support right kind of monopoly. Uh,
So my last takeaway from this chapter was, very beautiful thing he said that, he said, when you look at monopoly, you say, well, they're taking profits, and of course they can take less profits because they have so much room. They're taking too much profit, and that's bad. It's only bad if you think that that company or the world is not going to change. If that company will not lead to cheaper products, better products, more innovative products, more research. So in that sense, then you can say it's bad. So if a company decided they're never going to innovate anymore and they keep on taking huge profits from you, then that's bad. They should rather go into a competitive market, and eventually they will if they're not innovating, because monopoly needs innovation. Otherwise, you lose your monopoly. So he says you need to think about monopoly in the term of a business that will provide progress to the society, and that is your cost of progress to the future. And in that sense, a monopoly is a very good business.
No, he's actually saying that first he ties, as I mentioned, he talks about the insiders. They benefit from monopoly, like owners and all the employees even. But how about the society? And he said that society also benefits, and it's only the bad kind of monopoly which society basically does not benefit from. And then he also criticized economists afterwards, and they have dated models, and they basically then he compares their perfect computation to thermodynamic equilibrium, which is basically heat death of universe. So basically, that compares that, but that's kind of a side point that he makes. So then he says it's a condition. Monopoly is a condition for every successful business. That's a key home message, key take home message. And he actually says that all failed companies fail because they fail to escape the competition, and that is a very crucial point. Competition, avoid that. Whatever you want, whatever you
Competition
do,
kills companies,
competition kills companies. Competition is
and
bad.
especially startups.
Yeah,
So
and
I
then
think
that's basically, I think that's the final
right.
note.
I think let's
Uh,
conclude it over here. He continues on this idea and builds on this idea even more in the next
yeah,
chapter that
yeah,
we will do in our next video. So
yeah.
thank you.
All right.